All right. Good evening, everybody. Just give us a minute here as we have some folks to let in from the waiting room. There's Mary Beth, Jacqueline, Sandra. Still letting people in here. Oh, Tanya. There's Sean. Good evening, everyone. Just give us a minute. We are still letting folks in from the waiting room. Got a couple stragglers at 7 p.m. Eastern. All right. We just want to make sure everybody's audio gets hooked up too, so they hear what we're saying. Carol, here comes Carol. Right. James, good to see you. Good to talk to you on the phone earlier. Hope you're feeling well. Jenny. All right. I'm going to start right at 7:02. Yeah, there's Dara. All right, now that Dara's here, we can get started. Sarita. Yeah, it was good to talk to you earlier too. Yeah, reading in the chat. You all can feel free to use the chat below, and closed captioning is on as well for those who might need closed captioning. And we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the workshop. And so just kind of keep your questions as you're going through, and your questions can be for individual presenters or to them as a whole. We'll get started and we're ready to go. Hey, Lynette, good to see you. All right, welcome everybody. It's my favorite time because we get to hang out with one another and learn from one another. So the Mobilize Recovery Workshop Series is continuing virtually. This is actually the 5th out of 6 in this series. And so we will be sending you the Google Classroom. So if you need to catch up on any of the previous workshops in this series, we'll make sure that you have it. There'll be a follow-up email next week. And so we have 3 amazing presenters today. When we asked people at the beginning of the year, what's the main thing you want to see a workshop on? We heard a lot of fundraising and grant writing, and as a part of a lot of your community impact projects, that might include raising some funds to bring your idea into a reality. And so we want to be able to give people all the tools that organizers can use in order to do that. And so we have 3 amazing presenters. The first is a longtime friend of mine and is Pat Taylor, and she's done some amazing work in the recovery advocacy movement. And she says she's retired, but she always comes to help out when asked. And so she's amazing. We're happy to have her. And then Dr. Karen Scott from FOR is here. And so between the both of them, they've written for a lot of grants and also reviewed a lot of grants. And so the expertise is great to have. And then Dr. Marquita Robinson, who I had the pleasure of meeting in Dayton, Ohio, when we did Mobilize Recovery event there last year. And so I'm very grateful to have these guests today. Mobilize Recovery is grateful for all 3. And so I'm going to turn things over to Pat, and while I bring up her slides, and so we can all kind of dive into fundraising and grant writing tonight. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Aaron, and good evening to everybody. It's great to be here with you to talk about this really important topic. It's so important to be able to find the resources that you need to do the great work that you're doing and to build your capacity. I wanted to step back a minute before I start and say that, as recovery advocates, one of the things that we have to be thinking about always is how we can advocate for the resources that we need. So doing what you're doing, you're going to want to find the money and the resources for a particular project, but part of what being an advocate is all about is also understanding that we have a responsibility and an obligation to make sure that elected officials and others prioritize getting funds for the work that we're doing. So the good news is that there are, moving on, the good news is that we are in a place now where there are lots of opportunities to find work that you need, the resources that you need to do your work. And as we think about this, it's great because that means the more opportunities that you have to reach out and to identify new supporters for the work that you're doing. So moving forward with the slides, organizations have what are called diverse funding streams, so that, for example, if you have people in your community who want to donate to a particular project, individual donors, that's terrific. But there are also businesses in your community who may want to support your work and you want to know who they are. There are opportunities for grants and contracts and fundraising activities like crowdfunding and raffles. So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about those, but you can also think about the work that you do and how you could charge for those services and generate income. A number of organizations and groups have things like recovery cafes, also developing opportunities for in-kind contributions. So as I said, that the good news is that there's a lot of resources and opportunities out there, and it's figuring out for yourself and for your organization what makes the most sense. So thinking about your organization moving forward, planning for your organization's success. Erin and I have to figure out how to say move the slide forward. We have to think about what it is that you have to offer, how you can describe who you are and what you're doing. And part of that's having strong leadership, board and volunteers, or board and staff, that you know what it is that you want to be doing, so that you're not kind of all over the board, all over the place, and that you're mission driven, meaning if you hear about opportunity to get some money, you don't decide, oh, that's what we should do in our group so we can have that money, but rather thinking about what it is do we want to be doing to make the change that we needs to happen, and how can we interest other funders in terms of doing that, but how can we stay on track so that we can really make a difference. And then as we think about that, we also have to think, if you're not an individual, but you're an organization and you're sort of just starting, it may make sense not to spend time and resources developing the capacity to manage a grant, for example, but rather find another organization that's already done that work and can do that for you. So that's called having a fiscal sponsor. I was the executive director at Faces and Voices of Recovery for many, many years. And for the first 5 years of our life, we did not do all this 501c3. We didn't have all this billing. We didn't have reporting to the IRS, but rather we had a fiscal agent who was the Legal Action Center, who many of you may have heard of, who did that work for us. And we paid them a little bit of money, but it was really worth it, because when we were just getting started, we wouldn't have been able to do what we needed to do in order to attract the funds that we did. So we've gotten money from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, from Open Society Foundation, all through this fiscal sponsor. So you can get big money, you can get little money, but if you want to get a grant, that would be where the grantor wants to have to be tax deductible. You need to figure out how to do that. So you can take the first steps, try and get a 501c3, get going, but in the meantime, build your capacity through having a fiscal sponsor. So when you think about having a fiscal sponsor, you have to find an organization that's similar to yours, that has the same kind of goals and orientation. Make sure to formalize that relationship with a written agreement. So, if something comes up, you can figure it out, and then create and carry out your fundraising strategy. So it really makes sense to think about that. So I want to talk briefly about not grants, but about something else that many of you probably have heard about, which is crowdfunding. And I know I've been part of crowdfunding for people in my community who have needed housing, and other kinds of opportunities. So it's something that a group of people come together who are similarly inclined to support one another. It's usually online, and it helps you to tell your story. One of the issues that has come up as time goes on is that as people have had more experiences with that, is understanding how to set your goals. So your organization, you may think, oh, we need $50,000. But really, are we going to be able to raise $50,000 from this group of people that we want to begin to develop a relationship with? So figuring out how much money it is that you want to raise, and there may be different places that you go to come up with your final total. So this crowdfunding may be a way to get something off the ground, or you may be able to achieve your goal. So it's kind of thinking about it. Each of there's GoFundMe, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Facebook, Instagram are just a few examples. There's lots of ways that people are doing this. So thinking about what makes the most sense, and then creating, excuse me, a program that would work for you. So some of these GoFundMe, some of these crowdfunding things, you have to pay. You have to reach your goal in order to get the resources. Some charge a percentage fee, so you have to research which one might make the most sense for you. So thinking about which platform makes the most sense. Did you set a realistic goal? Are you ready to share and promote your fundraising to keep your backers updated? Because what crowdfunding does also is allow you to reach out to a whole different constituency and bring them into your organization and into your efforts. And I just wanted to give a couple examples of how people in the recovery community and organizations have used crowdfunding. So many of you, I'm sure, have heard about the Anonymous People and Tipping the Pain Scale, these incredible documentaries. So really, they were underwritten using Kickstarter. So hundreds of people donated to that, and it's made a huge, huge difference. The other effort is the McShin Foundation has worked to, its members do for their birthday a $200 fundraiser. And so what happens is that, I don't know what's going on with the PowerPoint here. So about people have, for their birthday, raised $200 for the organization on Facebook. So it's a great way, again, to get out the word about your organization, but also to build supporters that you might not otherwise reach. So, someone has a birthday, they have friends who don't know about recovery, about the recovery world, but they contribute to a birthday, and then they get engaged moving forward. So moving ahead, when you think about grants and contracts, one of the things we need to think about is if your project is something that would be an organization would be interested in supporting. So there are different places that you can find grants and contracts, federal, state, and local governments, private foundations and corporations, and many of them have seed grants, which is a good place to start for a smaller organization. Now, one of the challenges, I guess I'm going to put it as, is finding who are some of the people and the organizations that might be interested. Where the grant makers are is something that you can research. There's lots of information about that. At the end of this presentation, which is going to be posted on the website, I have included lots of information about where you can start to look and what some of the opportunities are in terms of building your understanding of who's out there who may have money that will support the work that you're doing. And when we think about grant makers and we think about the people that we work with, everything that we do is all about building relationships. And that really holds true when it comes to fundraising and development. So think about program officers and funders and grant makers as people who you can educate, motivate, but also develop relationships with, because they may not be able to give you money today, but they know other funders They can build relationships with other grant makers. They can really make you be part of this whole network of people that are building resources for the work that you're doing. So I can't say strongly enough how important it is to get to know who these people are. They may not give you money today, but they'll learn about your work, and 2 or 3 years from now, it will really pay off. So there are lots of different ways that you can apply for grants. Many foundations and organizations in the federal government also have applications that are filled out, but other foundations have come together to develop what are called common guidelines for grant applications, so you don't have to have a different one for each one. But the most important thing to think about when you're looking at a grant application is reading it really carefully and understanding what it is that people want to find out. So just in the resources section, there's a list of key documents that you'll need for most grants. So the good news is you don't have to develop everything from scratch each time, but rather you can modify materials and use them in different applications. But the most important thing is to read the application carefully. And it's little things, like what size font, should you use in terms of the guide of writing a grant? When should it be delivered, and how should it be delivered? I have a friend who lost a $300,000 grant because she had the date wrong, and she knew that she could have had that grant. I mean, that was all set, all greased, but because she delivered the grant application a day late, she lost that opportunity. So it's really, really important to know what it is that you have to do, how you do it, and figure out if your organization is eligible, and if you're following everything that you need to do. And just a quick one on this is like, if a grant application doesn't make sense for your organization, it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of time writing a grant application. I can't tell you how many times I've written grant applications after talking with a funder about what should be in the grant. So it's like building that relationship allows you to use your time wisely and paying attention to the details that make a difference. The other quick thing has to do with, who should write a grant and who should be making these relationships. So for many organizations, you don't have the resources to hire a grant writer, but rather finding someone perhaps in your organization who can help out do that, or finding opportunities for, others in your community who have experience to help you with it. But the most important thing is really deciding who's going to be in charge and who is going to be responsible for making sure all the deadlines are met and things go according to plan so that you can be successful in your grant application. So basically what you need to do is make an outline, write it well. There's lots of resources on how to do that. And I'd be happy to answer any questions people might have. It really is worth the effort because the work that you do is so important. Look forward to hearing from the other speakers and talking with you as well. So I'd like to turn it over at this point to Dr. Scott.
Right, Pat, can you hear me and see the slides? No?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Pat, thank you so much. Aaron, thank you for the invitation to be with all of you this evening. Pat, I starred next to a number of the points you made because they really resonate with my experience working in private foundations. So thank you. I think what I will do with my time is kind of drill down a little bit more on give everyone a little bit more of a view to what we see on the foundation side when we receive proposals, and what we look for and what we hope to see when we issue an RFP. But just to start with, I'll just introduce the foundation. for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're a fairly new private foundation for opioid response efforts, launched late in the fall of 2018 as a national grant-making foundation focused specifically on addressing solutions to the opioid and overdose crisis. We have a focus on accelerating and partnering with others to advance patient-centered, evidence-based solutions to address the opioid crisis. And our work to date over the last 4 years has included supporting work across these broad areas of professional education, payer and provider strategies, policy initiatives, and in expanding public awareness. To date, we've announced 98 grants that we have awarded since the beginning of 2020, committing about close to $38 million for those projects. And again, as a national foundation, one of the things we really look at is to make sure that we are trying to reach as many different parts of the country as we can. And so we're proud of the map on our website and continually trying to add to that and expand into and connect with organizations in parts of the countries maybe that we haven't reached yet. And part of that is a recognition that we're focusing on an issue that can look very different in terms of the epidemiology and how overdoses and the opioid crisis is playing out in different parts of the country, and what the solutions at a local level need to look like. On our website, you can get much more information about each one of these dots and each one of the grants that we've made, along with some of the products and resources that the grants have produced so far. Most of the grants we've done have fallen into one of these major programmatic areas. So we do think we tend to like to do cohorts of grants so that our grantees can also network and learn from each other. So we have a major focus on improving access to treatment for vulnerable populations. In addition to that, we began funding particularly some recovery organizations early in the COVID pandemic, where we were hearing a lot about gaps in terms of being able to support those services. And in our most recent program on supporting capacity building in community-based organizations, we also have a significant focus. A significant number of those organizations are recovery organizations as well. We also have a program we call our Innovation Challenge, which is focused on improving timely and actionable data to address the crisis, as well as addressing training to address stigma and bias. And then a program, a significant program focused on families and community-based prevention, with a focus more upstream on supporting children and families. In addition to the grant making, we also do a lot of webinars and develop other resources, issue briefs, policy briefs, what we're learning from our grantees. And again, all of those resources are available on our website. But today we clearly the focus is on how we got to have those 98 grantees and what they did. All right, and I will use our own experience over the last 3-4 years, as well as my prior experience at other foundations, to kind of talk through in a little bit more detail some of what Pat really teed up in her presentation. Most of what we have funded has been through national requests for proposals. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on what our RFP process is. But as with many foundations, in addition to using an RFP process, we also have the ability to sometimes do what I call some more proactive proposal generation. And to Pat's point about building a relationship with a funder over time, sometimes that can lead to ideas that go into an RFP. And then we'll make sure people we've been talking to know that there's an RFP out there. But sometimes it can also spark an idea that says, oh, if we worked with this organization, or it would really help fill in a gap in something that we didn't get out of an RFP. And that's when we may reach out to someone. So again, just to reinforce that, the points around building relationships over time with funders is really valuable to us as well, because it's how we learn. So as Pat said, major sources of grants are certainly all government, federal, state, local agencies, corporate philanthropy, and then my focus in our organization is a private foundation. So we can support nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, and government agencies to work on a range of mission-driven activities, social, economic, and environmental issues. We are, as a private foundation, we are governed by a specific set of federal laws and IRS regulations, and those really broadly shape what we can and cannot fund. So you'll find on our website, under our grant making and applying for a grant, guidelines and eligibility, we try to be really clear on who we can fund and who we cannot fund. As Pat was referring to, the main focus is on organizations that are public charities under this IRS designation of a 501c3. We will consider organizations that are applying with a fiscal sponsor. Key to that is to actually have a clear agreement with a fiscal sponsor and including that in your proposal, in your application, and making sure that the fiscal sponsor knows that you're applying for the grant. In addition to 501c3s, private foundations can fund colleges and universities, and can also do grants with state, local, and tribal governments. What we can't do is fund public charities that it would use the funds to in turn fund other organizations, religious organizations, private individuals. We cannot fund political lobbying and election activities, or provide funds that are then used to create an endowment at another organization. So those are the constraints that we operate under. Oops, not fancy. Okay. Also in our guidelines, on our website, we say that we cannot review unsolicited proposals. But we do make every effort to talk with people who reach out to us. We simply do not have the staff and the capacity to review proposals at any time, and anytime something comes in on any topic. But if it's something that we think does potentially fit with one of our current programs, or with something we're thinking about, or just work that we think is important for us to learn more about, we will reach back out and set up time to learn more about the work. And again, to the point about beginning to build a relationship, that's often a way to get started. But so I would say, when you're reaching out to a foundation that has this constraint, don't send a whole proposal. Send a summary. Send a couple of paragraphs, some sense of the work that gives a sense of why a call or a meeting would make sense. But if this is on their website, don't send a whole proposal because they won't be able to review it in a standard way. Foundations also set policies around how much of an indirect they will allow in their budget, and that typically should be clear on everybody's on foundations websites. This is pretty standard. We provide up to 10% indirect. So that's the part of the budget that can go for sort of general operating, doesn't fall into, not specific to staff or to the cost of running a particular project, but falls more into a general operating costs. Okay. So our typical process for a request, and our request for proposal process, is that we use a two-stage process. We will ask first for either a letter of intent or a short concept note. We try to keep those pretty light. So in terms of, in short, so that they're not burdensome, but enough information in a couple of pages that give us a sense of whether or not the idea and the work is responsive to what's been outlined in the request for proposals, and whether things like and a little bit of information about the qualifications, the experience of the organization, of the project team, of the project director, rough estimate on the budget, so that we have, again, so that we know that things are in line with what we laid out in an RFP, in the RFP itself. We will review all of those internally, and then select from those, and those that meet that bar, that first step. We then ask for full proposals to be completed, or invite people to submit full proposals. Everything that we receive in our process is reviewed by at least 2 senior people on the staff. And then from that, we identify those that are the strongest in terms of the proposals, and also get external reviewers. So we want to make sure that we're getting a good amount of input into narrowing us down to ultimately the final set of proposals, which we then present to our board. Again, important considerations before you start the RFP, before you start writing a proposal. I couldn't agree with Pat more. Please read the RFP and make sure it's something that does fit, that you're responding in a way that does fit with the objectives of the RFP. Follow instructions in terms of things like word count, or particular components. Make sure the budget's there, etc. CV on the person who would be leading the project, etc. Note whether it's a 2-stage process of a concept or a letter of intent versus and then a full proposal. We also always do an informational webinar when we about 2 weeks after we release a new RFP. So information, and we put that information in the RFP document. So you can look out, and it's opportunity to hear us walk through the RFP, but also to ask questions. And I would say when we do those, we typically have around 500 people on, and we probably try to get through, 70, 100 questions on those webinars. So it's always helpful for us to hear what people, the kinds of questions that people have about the RFP, and hopefully it's helpful in determining whether or not it's something that makes sense for you to apply for. Again, I think I went through this, but again, the concept note really helps us in making that first cut, and in terms of who to invite for a full proposal, and gives us a sense of what the idea is of the project. Not fully fleshed out, we don't expect that, but an idea of what direction you're going in, who would be doing the work, and roughly what it would cost. Full proposal for us has a number of different sections, which I've listed here. I'm going to run through them quickly. And Aaron, I'm happy for you to make sure you're keeping me on time. So I'll run through these over the next few slides. I think the executive summary for me is extremely helpful and valuable. So I get frustrated when there's not a good executive summary. It should be succinct, but it really, it's the opportunity to kind of pull all the pieces together for us. It's almost it's longer than an elevator speech, but it's that same sense. We think about it as, it's often it's something that you might want to write last after you've written the rest, and then you can pull out the key pieces. But it's, why is it important? What's the issue you're trying to solve? Why is it an important issue to solve? How are you going to do it? And what's the outcome, right? What's the product at the end? So good executive summary is key. And then you flesh out those different parts. We always have a section about significance and impact. Why is the grant important? Who's the population that's a target or would be impacted or benefit from the work that you're proposing. To that end, we certainly like to look for and see any type of data that helps support why the significance and impact, and it may be around the prevalence and, for our work, prevalence of OUD and SUD in your community. It may be that your work is going to focus on a particular population, a rural or minority population, and being able to have some data, some documentation on why that's the place to focus, and what drives you there, and then what the potential impact will be of doing the work in terms of making an improvement. Moving on the proposal, there's always a focus on then fleshing out what exactly the work is, what the strategy and the approach is. So having clear goals and objectives about the project, and how you'll be able to measure those activities. Again, making sure that the strategy that you describe is consistent with the objectives and the goals that you set out for the overall project and in your response. And then, of course, what your expected outcomes and milestones are. And really important here, one of the things we look for is wherever possible that some of those outcomes and milestones are really concrete and something that can be quantified. Now, it varies by project. So some of those may, numbers might not always be the right way to evaluate, but wherever it makes sense, if you say you want to increase how many people are coming into your RCO, or you're going to increase how many people are connected to a treatment program, etc. Those are opportunities to say, well, where are you now, and where do you hope to be at the end of it? Numbers are certainly something we look for there, so we can get a sense of whether investing in the work could have the potential to have an impact. And then also think about what the path is to sustainability. And I recognize as I'm reading grants that it's not always possible or feasible to expect that everyone would already know what their sustainability plan is. But we do look at, whether or not people are beginning to think about that. So, or how you would think about it. And it may be and one example of that might be to be thinking that, well, with the results from our work over the next year, or with interviews with people participating in our program over the next year, we'll be able to use that to take it to additional funders and grantors. So it doesn't have to be as necessarily, it's great if it is as concrete as we know after 2 years of your funding, we'll be able to go to our state and get more funding. Now, occasionally that happens and it's great, but at least to be thinking about what that path would be, so the work will continue. And finally, really follow the instructions on a proposal in terms of what you're being asked for in terms of budget, and justify both the budget itself and the justification narrative. I think in our process, we really do try to be pretty interactive with applicants. Foundations vary on this, but we really try, if we get in a proposal that we think has a lot of those pieces, we're likely to still have some questions. And in many cases, if it's a strong proposal, but we have questions, we will then reach out. So it's important to be clear on who the point of contact is, and to update the foundation if that person changes, so that we're able to, in a timely way, have a conversation with you, and continue to flesh out an understanding of the proposal, and address questions as they come up. And I will end there and look forward to any questions from you. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Dr. Robertson.
Good afternoon or good evening, I should say. Thank you very much, Aaron, for inviting me to participate in this. I want to commend Pat and Karen. This was very good information. I really got a lot out of it, being a grant writer within my organization as well. But one of the things that I would like to talk about and share some information from my experience is the equity in grant writing. One thing that we know is that our society is becoming more and more diverse. And so one of the things that we need to take into consideration is how can we bring equity in the services that we provide and show within the funding that we're asking for. So one of the things that I would like to start off first with is understanding the fact that although equity and equality are often used interchangeably, there's still a difference in the meaning. And so we know that equality is treating everyone the same. However, equity involves the fair treatment based on the unique circumstances of each organization and community. So for example, an organization can provide services to anyone within that community. However, are those services involve the fair treatment based on the unique circumstances, whether it is race, gender, sexual identity, whether it is ability or lack of. So it is important that we have an understanding of the difference in the two, but we also know that equity recognizes the different needs and experiences, and then we address those disparities. So with grant writing, one of the things that is most important and I found to be significant is that it should be a team effort. When we talk about collaboration, a lot of times on a professional level, we look at the collaboration of other entities and bringing together to provide this service for the individual. However, we also want to include different perspectives throughout that grant writing process so that we know that the proposal will be thoughtful, relevant, and inclusive. Most importantly, though, we want to embark on our grant writing by consulting with people and communities who are most deeply impacted by the issues that we're trying to address in that proposal. One thing that I have found is those individuals are the experts in the issues that are impacting them. And so that information would bring a great asset to me in the process of writing that grant. One of the other things that it can be significantly important is making sure that the team that I'm putting together, whether we're writing the grant internally within the organization, utilizing a diverse team that includes people from different identities, lived experience to inform on that project that you're putting together. You will want to, because we're looking at not only considering equity, we're looking at race, gender, ability, the position within the organization, as well as within the community. And we want to be able to ensure that we include the people who will actually be doing the work of the project. They should have an informed decision on that process and putting that application together. But we also want to have an inclusion of the people that the project is being designed and implemented for. So we want to know the input of those that the work we were doing, how it will impact those individuals. We also know that engaging in an equitable and inclusion grant writing process, grant writing takes time. And I can constitute from what Pat has shared, as well as what Karen has shared, specifically how Karen broke it down in the details of the process. Grant writing takes time. It's not something that can be done in a day or in a week. It is a process, not an event. And so you would need to not only consult with the experts and constituents, but there's also a brainstorming process that needs to go into that component, drafting the narrative, putting together a comprehensive budget. And one of the things from my experience is the body of the grant has not always been the difficult part for me, because the collaborations and brainstorming and the diverse team that I bring together to put it together is the easy part. It's the budget that sometimes can be most time consuming, and making sure that you have all the resources, the monetary resources in the areas that you need to be able to successfully execute that grant. So what we know is, no matter what your organization mission or purpose is, we all have the opportunity and responsibility to be on the side of striving for justice and dismantling racism. And I say all that to say, because of the diversity and looking to incorporate equity within our grant writing so that we can show equality for all, one of the things that I want to touch a little bit of base on is utilizing equitable language within your grant proposal. And there's 5 components that can help you do that. So I'm gonna refer to my notes a little bit here to help me explain this process with you. So one of the things, we want to use the specific language rather than vague euphemism. For example, using words like at risk, even though we have good intentions, those labels can obscure the meaning. And in order for us to gain real clarity and specificity, we want to use things to empower and give that proposal strength. So for example, the majority of students are Black and Latinx. If this is the case, why were we opposed to signaling that they are at risk because they're Black or Latinx, as opposed to saying that these individuals are more impacted in a disproportionate rate? So being able to identify and using more specific language rather than putting a labeling or a euphemism on them can be very beneficial. We also don't want to use objectives in the place of a person. And this is something that is really, really important, because a lot of times we will identify a person based on their circumstance rather than separating the individual's identity and persona from their circumstances. Just because a person is homeless does not mean that they're homeless. It means that they are homeless, I'm sorry, but it doesn't mean that that's the person. That's just their circumstances. So we want to be able to, because a lot of times we write grants to provide services to people. We want to make it pertinent that individuals know the circumstances, the disparities that they are experiencing, but we don't want that to be their identity. Then we also want to allow people to define and describe themselves. Who can better tell you about me than me? And so being able to proactively engage and listen to the people in our communities, because we're writing these grants to serve the people in our communities. Not only will we be able to allow them to define and describe themselves, we will also be able to hear the issues and barriers that are impacting them. And then one that I find to be most significant and really important is addressing systems, not just symptoms. So again, I want to use the example of homelessness. So if I have a mother that has 6 children and I'm identifying her as a homeless individual, I'm taking away her identity and her persona. If I'm addressing and discussing the system and not just the system, I'm not only identifying that there's a housing or homeless issue, because this individual might not be homeless because she's irresponsible. It might be she's homeless because she has a job, but her job pays her $12 an hour, which does not constitute a salary to afford a house that will house 5 people plus the utilities. And so being able to not only address or not only note the symptoms, but also address the systems that are impacting or being in the way. It brings more light to the disparities, the barriers and issues that the individuals are facing. And then lastly, but not least, move farther along the spectrum. It's really important that we move from being exploitative to being more empowering. My experience, a lot of people that we work with are not bad people. They just are experienced bad situations, bad circumstances, or they have made some poor choices. But that does not make them bad people. And so a lot of times we work on a client-centered strength base, which allows us to not only empower them individual, but utilize their strengths to help elevate them. And it's important when we're writing into our grant proposals to create a level of equity and to be more concise and clear, as Karen was stating, that in using this language, it will help us be able to do that. Now, because I'm talking about equity, it's also important to know that diversity, and again, equity and inclusion are 3 closely linked values. And these values are held by a lot of organizations. However, those organizations, I want to say, can play a key factor in implementing those. But even though those are the 3 closely linked values, they may not always be utilized equally. And so we want to include people of different races, ethnicities, religions, abilities, genders, and sexual orientations. When we're considering diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're not only looking at the differences of people, we're looking at making sure that services is just and fair for all, but then we're also including them in the process. And this is an ongoing process that requires a commitment to go beyond symbolic gestures and implement tangible change. So one of the things that is really, really important, a lot of individuals and organizations have incorporated the class standards within their policies and procedures, because diversity and equity inclusions, those values should not only emit outwardly, but they should emit inwardly. And so in doing that, one of the questions that I ask in writing, and I have my staff, and we often do this, is how do I confront and unpack my own racism, sexism, classism, saviorism, colonialism, and religious prejudice so that my work has a positive impact? Because a lot of times we will experience implicit biases. So it's not, when we're looking at implicit biases, they might be biases there that we don't even realize are there. So I need to ask myself those questions in my attempts to make an equitable proposal that I'm trying to put out in regards to, say, for example, the Foundation. Can't see my screen. So it is important that agencies and institutions clearly understand the groups that they serve. And in doing that, we're better able to develop those strategies to ensure that the services and programs are delivered equitably. One of the things that a lot of RFPs, foundations, grant funders, and specifically, I know for a fact, federal funders are now asking for, in addition to an evaluation plan and a sustainability plan, they're also wanting a disparity impact statement, which is also known as a DIS. And the purpose of that DIS is for grant recipients to be able to identify, contextualize, and address those disparities, and to develop and implement a disparity reduction action plan. So not only are they identifying and contextualizing, they are developing a plan with a quality improvement process linked to it to address those identified gaps. This is important to creating that equity within the services that is being provided, that just and fair treatment across the board of the individuals that we serve. These statements, they clarify what inequities exist. See, they will help you be able to identify so it allows me not only to be transparent, to put something in place to be able to address those gaps, and then a process in place to help me be able to continue improving as we move through the process. It also allows me to ensure that groups experiencing those disparities can attain the same level of access, quality of care, and positive outcomes as others that we serve in our populations. And so with that, one of the resources that was very, very beneficial, I have added to my screen side, and that's embracing the equitable and empowering language in grant writing. And with that, I'm going to open the floor because I am quite sure that there is a lot of questions that individuals would like to ask. Thank you very much for your time.
Dr. Robinson and Dr. Scott and Pat, thank you all so much for sharing your expertise and your time tonight. That was a lot to take in, and I think you're right. I think people probably have some questions. And so if you can virtually raise your hand we'll get to you and we'll unmute you. I just want to remind people that there's a lot of additional materials and resources that the presenters, maybe they referenced. We're going to have those and the slides in this video in the Google Classroom for you all to read through. And it's like, it really is like taking a class, like watch the video and then there's reading materials and then you can dive deeper into this. And so this is just a glimpse of some of the grant writing and fundraising that you all can look to do and build your skill set. And then you can dive deeper in the classroom. And so let's go at Tanya Wheeler first, out in Colorado.
Thanks, Erin. Hi, Pat. It's so good to see you. And I have a quick question. Does fund advocacy work being done by recovery community organizations?
So as a private foundation, the advocacy is always a tricky area. So we cannot, as a private foundation, we cannot fund lobbying. So we cannot, if you have in your state, if you're trying to do like directed work to your state legislature on a particular bill or piece of legislation or advocate for something, we cannot fund that.
Mhm.
More broadly, generally on advocacy, if you are, if you want to do education generally to members of your local, county council or, something like that, we're allowed to consider those kinds of proposals. And so as an example, at a national level, at a federal level, we have a grant with the Bipartisan Policy Center. They do educational sessions with members of Congress on issues related to OUD and the Support Act, et cetera. But we can't fund an activity if they're going to specifically talk about a bill or legislation. But again, if it's generally what's happening in the space in the field, which is important information to hopefully help them frame what they do, then we can support that. I hope that helps.
And we have a pretty good, we had a pretty good video workshop a little while ago that differences between 501c3, C4, and
Right.
being an advocacy. And so we'll put those in the classroom for people to check that out. Casey in New Jersey.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. And Erin would be surprised if I didn't ask a question. So thank you, Pat and Dr. Scott and Dr. Robinson. I will most certainly go back and rewatch this and write down more information on the screens. I appreciate the presentations because I absorb more when I read and take notes. And my quick question, it is quick today, Erin. Dr. Scott, I wrote down the email program staff at 4fdn.org, Ford Foundation, because I'm looking for guidance on how to, I don't know if easily is the word, but to research specific types of grants. Can I reach out to that email and they'd be able to either say, yes, we can help you with that, or no, we can't?
Sure. I mean, we can, we're happy to be helpful where we can, if we're
Okay.
able to, if we are aware of other funders that are, also in a, that are in this space. As a national foundation too, we do try to build relationships with local and state funders.
Right.
And oftentimes, because we're small, and
Right.
but oftentimes if we can help bridge and create sort of a network and connect people who might with funders who might also be in their in their geographic area, we'll try to do that as well. It's a we can't take on everything, but we're happy to.
No, I just have a question, and I have a mentor now for my project, which I'm really excited about, and building relationships was one of the first two steps he's holding me accountable for. So thanks for mentioning that, and thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
I wanted to mention as well, I know a lot of folks know that Opioid Response Network is a partner of Mobilize Recovery this year. And although they don't give out direct funding, they are very good at research. And so if you need research for a specific grant that you're going after, you can fill out and you can do this for your project too. I just dropped the link in the chat, and there's a question to ask: where do you hear about ORN? You just put Mobilize Recovery event. It's a Mobilize Recovery event here, and so if you need more research specifically on a grant that you're going after, or you're looking at a grant and you want to be more comfortable with the process and some of the research, you can submit a request there. So let's go. Is it Say Me? I don't want to mispronounce your name. I'll let you.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So I'm currently incarcerated at the Reentry Center in Wyndham, and I'm a Marine Corps veteran that's currently working with two other brilliant minds on grant proposals for equine therapy for the currently incarcerated veterans, and also a separate program working with WellPath and a VA clinician to collaborate to help making a workbook for them. And I'm trying to figure out if there's any grants that would help with the funding for the in-classroom part. And as we're trying to make that where it's a continual program, not just in Maine, if it becomes successful here, but throughout the rest of the nation at other carceral communities to help with trauma, minimize relapses and substance use, minimize like aggression reactivity as well, and smooth transitions into the community.
Is that for me?
It's fair.
So again, I think, it's, it sounds like really interesting work and a bigger conversation than, but I'd be happy for you to reach out through the email that Ian put in the chat and and to have a little bit broader, bigger conversation and understand and try to, help think through what might be next steps for you.
Did Pat or Dr. Robinson, did you want to jump in too? We have another question, but I just didn't know if either one you wanted to respond there.
I wanted to just mention briefly, Aaron, that in the resources section of my presentation, there's information about places where you can find out, based on the topic area that you're interested in proceeding with, funders who might be interested in that. So there are places where you can do, search and find out, if there's a community foundation where you are that might be interested in this, or also national interests, national foundations that might be interested as well.
Lynette in Ohio.
Yeah, I gotta ask a question too, Aaron. Everything was great. Thank you to all the presenters. Great information. I do have a question for Dr. Robinson. Regarding like the disparities impact statement, how do you suggest communities that don't know what they don't know with regard to folks that aren't accessing their services, and how to change that? Where would you suggest they start?
I think the biggest thing to start with, again, when we're talking about the collaboration, reaching out to those individuals in those communities, whether it be through focus groups, anonymous surveys, different things like that, because you want to gather that information. How can I best create a impact statement if I don't know what all is impacting you, because there has not been a connection? So it's really important that I make that connection, build that relationship, and gain that information. I can also use that information as a form of data.
Thank you.
Right. I don't see any more hands. I just want to, there's still a minute or so for hands. I just wanted to share today. I was talking to a woman in Ohio that she's been in the recovery space for a long time and done grant writing, fundraising, grant writers in recovery space for a while. But then, so she had this idea to open up a farm, but have recovery housing at this farm, and they do life skills, and they do and they're growing food, and they're raising rabbits, and she was talking about, I like how Karen early on had talked about the importance of building relationships, where for years she's built relationships in the recovery community, and now she's got to build relationships with the farm. She's talking about her experience of building relationship in the farming community, and how just at the core of everything that she's doing, she's keeping that building relationships piece front and center. And I know that we've had a couple workshops on the building relationships as well. So Robin in Nevada, who's in her car. Are you always in your car, Robin?
I'm out of my car now. Thank you all so much for this information. My question is about gathering information. So on one of the grants that I was helping with, it asked about how we were including the voice of our constituents and the people that our grant was serving in a systematic way. How is it impacting our organization's decision making and everything. So, and I was really curious about how formal that data collection process has to be, because I know like survey creation, I've created really bad surveys. I've created decent surveys. And I know that there are people who make a living off of making surveys and gathering data and input. So I'm just super curious from the grantor's perspective on how research-based and how systematic that feedback collection needs to be.
Sure. You know, from our perspective in terms of reading grants, we really try to you know, kind of match a level of, you know, kind of expectation, and we try to be really mindful around, you know, sort of the level of burden that's involved with preparing a proposal. So I think there's a range of ways to do that, you know, that would be acceptable, you know, and credible. Right. And it may be that you are doing, you know, in interviews or a focus group, you know, where you're bringing in 5 or 10 people who use your services. But you're doing it in a thoughtful way, and you're you know, and you're making sure you're reaching from different parts of, you know, of your community, or, you know, something that's representative in a way. But I wouldn't expect, when we do our community-based organization grants for really small organizations, I certainly, you know, I'm not looking for a randomized controlled trial, you know, or you know, or an epidemiological study that, you know, would be, you know, funded by you know, a CDC or NIH. So we really try to, you know, we want something that helps support the case for the project and that's credible and thoughtful, but we also hopefully are, you know, try to be reasonable in terms of what we're looking for.
And I want to jump in to add on with Dr. Scott. One of the things is, as she was saying, those focus groups and different things, but I think, again, having the informed information from the communities or the population of focus that you're looking to work with is pertinent, but you can also utilize that information in a comparison. And so being able to show that data will also help you be able to show the disparities or the impacts that community is facing, that will help paint the picture for the individual funder that is reading that. One of the other suggestions, and I found this being that I am a nonprofit agency, is a lot of colleges, especially if you are in an area where there's colleges, utilize interns, because they can help you be able to pull that information together.
It's a great idea. Great suggestion. Yeah. I can quickly give you an example of sort of what didn't work. You know, what is, which is, you know, if someone writes in to Dr. Robinson's pointer, you know, and says that they want to develop a whole program to reach out to the Hispanic population and it's because they've been running their program for 5 or 6 years, and while there's a significant Hispanic population within their community, nobody who's walked inside their door is from that community, and then they go on to list a whole bunch of things they're going to do, but none of it was informed by asking anybody in that community why it is they never walked inside the door. That doesn't work. So.
All right.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm responding to people's comments in the chat and letting people in. So thank you all. I think that looks like it's it for the questions, but I wanted to thank the 3 of you. We will work to get as much of the supporting materials into the classroom, and everybody here will get a follow-up email to access the classroom. And like I said, this is the 5th out of 6 workshops. And so it'll give you access to every single one of those workshops prior. And next month, we meet on the last Thursday of every month. And so looking ahead, it is going to be on Thursday, August 24th, or no, that might be wrong. It might be don't quote me on that. We'll send you the next one. I don't want to give you the wrong date. And so it's usually the last Thursday of the month. And so we'll see everybody next month. Always at 7 Eastern. That part is true, but I don't want to give you the wrong date. And so we will get you the recording and follow-up materials soon. I want to thank Dr. Robinson, Dr. Scott, and Pat Taylor for bringing their expertise tonight. And if the presenters, if you're comfortable with it, you can drop your contact information in the chat. I know it's at the end of your slides, but if people want to reach out for anything else, feel free to put your information in the chat. And with that, everybody be safe. It's good to see you all, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank
Bye
you
all.